Morning guys, this is like, you're getting peak hobo Jack today. Like, the beard's out of control, got the fucking hair grown over like the side of my ears. This is like me when I'm like, I know I need to go to the barber. Like the hair just reminds me of, what's his face out of Pirates of the Caribbean? Davy Jones, just fucking sitting like this. So you're getting peak Jack, hobo Jack for this video, and then next week you'll see me all clean and fresh. But in today's video, I got a great question from one of my lifters, Montana. I'm gonna pop the question up on screen now. Is, hey, how often should we check on 1 rep maxes? Now, with a lot of my videos, I'm gonna take questions I have from my lifters because chances are if they have them, you have them. And just a bit of background story on Montana. She's been training now for, with myself, about 8 weeks. I'd class her as like a beginner to intermediate lifter in terms of this new style of training into like new realms of strength training and powerlifting specific, a beginner to intermediate. So, and I know very often that she would often lift max, like very close to her max of 80, 85, 90% and above. And she used to check her 1 rep maxes often. And you know, getting someone out of that habit, in my opinion, the way that I approach it is I educate them around why and when you want to test your 1 rep max. And this was my answer. So her first question was, how often should we check our 1 rep max? And my answer was, great question. In my opinion, you have 2 choices. At your chosen powerlifting competition, on a date that we have agreed upon so your program and training can align, right? And I asked her if she's getting the itch to test. Now, Montana's next response and question, which is here, yeah, I was just wondering if I could be calculating my percentages at a higher weight or not. Also, the training blocks, does the percentage that I'm training at get any higher? There's kind of 2 questions in there. Now, that first one is just wondering if I could be calculating my percentages at a higher weight or not. I love this question. It was only about a year ago that I was kind of told this question and asked this question myself by one of my mentors, Thomas. And it's always like, let's say on your program you see 75%, and the question that you should always ask yourself is 75% of what? I often find that lower percentages when you're first starting out a program, you know, you're in your hypertrophy phase or even strength training phase, peaking phase, you're always on doing 75, 80, 90% of what number? Because if that number changes, if it goes up or down, then that means the number that is spit out at the end of it will obviously change as well. What a lot of people would do is they will often find that the percentages that they're on feel too light, so they'll boost the percentage up. So they'll constantly be chopping and changing between hypertrophy percentages, muscle building percentages and reps that you can do at those, strength phases, peaking phases, and it just gets an absolute fucking mess, to be honest with you. The best thing that you can change, and what Montana said here is, if I could be calculating my percentages at a higher weight, i.e. a higher 1 rep max. Now, because she's still in what I would call like a mass building phase, like refining some technique side of things whilst adding in a lot of volume to build some size, I often find people can calculate their 1 rep max a little bit higher than normal, as long as, you know, the top boxes are being ticked of they're moving correctly, they're moving how I want them to, they're able to hit their sets and reps and they're able to recover. They can often boost their 1 rep max up, and then slowly what I find is it comes down or gets to just very close to their old 1 rep max, maybe a slightly higher as they enter their strength and peaking phases. So that's the first thing you always want to ask yourself. 75% or whatever percentage that you are calculating off on today's training of what 1 rep max, and that number that is spit out at the end will constantly change if you change your 1 rep max, not the percentage. It just keeps your training a lot more structured, and when you look back at it, you don't look and go, what the fuck why are my numbers shooting all over the place? It's very hard to track your training like that. The second question, also with training blocks, does the percentages that I'm training at get any higher? Great question, and it's the topic of today's conversation, right? I'm gonna pop it up on screen now. Here is an example of a beginner's and intermediate's training cycle. Now, this is a training cycle or like a template that I will use to build out my lifters' like training blocks. And as you can see, you've got block 1, block 2, block 3, all the way up to block 6. And you can see just under that the phases that people go through of hypertrophy again, skill and strength work, peaking their strength, or you can rewind this whole training block back to number one. And just what I want to talk to you about here, just going to scroll down to some notes, pop them up on screen. Beginner and intermediate training cycle notes. I want to start with this to give you guys context before I talk about the actual, like the full cycle itself and my template that I use. Is beginners need more time to build muscle. Beginners and intermediates is what I should have written there. They need more time to build muscle because they have not spent the time, the years, the reps, the sets, the training sessions to maximize the amount of muscle that they can put on their frame as well as inside of their particular weight classes. The next thing is they will need more time spent on learning the main movements. So a squat, bench, and deadlift, they'll need a lot more time refining those movements at lower percentages than what you might find from a more advanced or elite lifter. That'll come in another video. So with hypertrophy phases, the lifter can work within 62.5% up to 75. Some people who have been training for a little bit longer, who have more training experience but is new to this way of training, can obviously push or tolerate up to 80% inside of a hypertrophy phase. Strength phases for beginners and intermediates is 77.5 up to 87.5. Again, some people might be able to tolerate 90% if their recovery is well, they're sleeping well, they're eating well, and everything's moving great inside of their training cycle. And then finally, when you have a beginner and intermediate peak of 85% up to 92.5%, some of them can push again a little bit higher. You have that little bit just to work within. You're not completely restricted within these percentages, but they're just good ones to build a template off and manage from there. Remember, it's always like 62.5% of what number? 92.5% of what number? So beginners and intermediates, that is just some notes on understanding why this training cycle looks the way it is. But like I say, beginners and intermediates need more time to build, or need to spend more time building more muscle, right? The more muscle that they have on their frame, the more they can then strengthen that muscle later on, and then once that muscle is then stronger, they can then focus on just that peaking their strength, that absolute max, and then obviously come out with a new 1 rep max. So like I say, in each of my training blocks, they're about 5 weeks. More often than not, you'll often see lifters could do a 4 week of increasing their load and intensity, harder and harder training, with 1 week of a deload where you slash the percentage down, normally to maybe around the realms in a hypertrophy block of what they started at in week 1, with lower reps, lower sets, and then just a lot lighter accessory movements. So let's take Montana for an example, right? She started about, I think this is her second training cycle. So she started with me and we worked within ranges of 62.5% to 70%. It should feel pretty light with the squat, bench, and deadlift, and it was. The way she was moving, excellent. But as I said to you before, and I'm just going to bring these notes back up, focus on the second note there. They will need more time spent learning the main movements. When you're looking at the squat, bench, and deadlift, lifters need time to understand the principles of the squat, bench, and deadlift. Let's use the squat for an example. They need to learn how to brace correctly. They then need to know how to hold tension in their hips correctly, as well as maintain upper back rigidity. That's not going to happen after one training session. On average, with people learning these, understanding first of all how to brace each individual components, they need time to just understand those and create that feeling, right? The next thing is then combining them all together and having some good reps, some bad reps, some great weeks, some less than optimal weeks, and then making that as consistent as possible. They'll need more time spent doing that. So when we go back into these hypertrophy phases at 62.5 to 70%, that's my main focus. I'm not really giving people sets of 8 here. I'm giving them, more sets, less reps. Let's say 5 sets of 6, 6 sets of 6, 7 sets of 6, to keep that volume nice and high, because at these lower percentages and being a beginner and intermediate, their recovery is going to be better, i.e. they're not going to have as much neural fatigue leading from session to session as you might get someone who squats 300 kilos and when they're at these 62.5%, if ever, they're going to feel pretty fucking gassed after doing 6 or 7 sets of 6 reps at into the 200s. That's just fucking stupid. So going back to Montana, block 1, spending time with hypertrophy, a shitload of volume. Then we've gone over to our second block of hypertrophy, where as you can see, we've kind of started where we left off on that 70%, and we can work up to, I personally like to work up by 2.5% a week. We're gonna max out at 77.5%. Again, always remember, as she's kind of getting to the end of this block, the weights are still going to be relatively light for her. They're going to feel pretty light, and I'm okay with that as long as her movement patterns are down pat. This is where a lot of lifters fuck up. They get to the end of these hypertrophy blocks and they think, oh, okay, cool, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go super fucking heavy and skip to like block 5, as you can see there, working up into the 82s up to 85%, and it's going to fuck them up. Because they haven't spent enough time on skill work a little bit later. They haven't got that like motor pattern down pat. They haven't really spent enough time building the muscle that, or maximizing the muscle mass that they can, and refining each of those movements. So what I tend to do around this time, it's very fucking common with a lot of new lifters, is when they're coming to me like Montana, they're going, you know, can I up my percentages? I'm like, why don't we just keep the percentages the same, but increase the 1 rep max you're working off? More often than not, like, you know, 5 to 10 kilos is a good start, or you can do 5 to 10%, whichever works for you. And you just like getting your macronutrients and calories from a diet plan, it's just, let's start there, and then we can go up or down depending on how your movement and how your recovery is. So, you know, even after 10 weeks of training, we're still gonna go into, keep the volume pretty high as we then move into the hypertrophy block number 3. And as I've said before, going back to these notes here, people can tolerate up to 80% inside of a hypertrophy block. And this is kind of, again, just a draft, and this is what I'm going to put Montana up to, since she said, you know, her 1 rep, her weights are feeling quite light, can we up the percentages? I'm going to push her up to 80% inside of this hypertrophy block. But understand, like, she's going to be doing, you know, 5, 6, 7 sets of, you know, 5 reps, maybe starting at 6 reps and going down to 5 reps as she gets closer towards that 80%. It's going to be very taxing for her. And this is the point where they go, oh fuck, like shit, this is now really damn hard. It usually gets to about block 3 as well as block 4 as we start to keep that volume quite high, but the weight's also increasing. This is where the training sessions really start to get tough for people, and they start to understand whether or not they put the time and effort in the last 2 training blocks, those 10 weeks of training, to be able to handle that volume, as well as I said before, maximizing and learning how to perform the big 3 movements of squat, bench, and deadlift. So yeah, we're going to spend another training block of about 5 weeks up to 72.5 up to 80%. And this is really that make or break block. This is where I personally find out whether or not the lifter has spent enough time working on their technique to handle those heavy loads, and they don't go back to what they did before, right? If you got a lifter that came to you, going to use the squat, or goes to me, or you are a lifter, and you get to around those 80% marks, and your knees start bowing in like they used to again, it's like, well, why the fuck are we going to reinforce bad movement patterns again? Aren't we just best to rewind one of these blocks and rebuild this movement pattern to make sure it doesn't happen? Because if it's starting at 80%, imagine what it's going to do when we get to like 85 to 90%. Like, your knees are just going to be caving in. What's that going to do to your 1 rep max? It might go backwards. Like, the best chance you got is maybe keeping it the same. You know, you might be lucky and get a little bit of an increase, but it's going to be dirty and it's going to feel shit, and you're not going to feel like you really earned it. So it gets to about block 3 where I really find out how much work the lifters put in, whether they've been listening to my feedback, how much muscle have they built, so that we can then strengthen it. And then we're going to work up to somewhere between that 75 up to 80%. They push to 80%, they're going to fucking know about it, trust me. And then we lead into block 4. And as you can see here, we've then gone on to skill / strength work. So I'm so sorry for the people who are like OCD about capital letters, because the skill has a capital S and the strength has a small s. That's rough, I do apologize. Let's just move on. Strength, when you get into these strength rounds, right, what people need to understand is it's all about the skill of lifting heavy weights at this point, right? You've built as much muscle as you can inside of those 3 hypertrophy blocks, right? Inside of strength blocks, you're not really going to build any new muscle, right? Because the outcome isn't the same anymore. right? The outcome is now to become as strong as you can before you peak your strength to go for that 1 rep max. But before you start looking at all of those things, we need to keep refining the skill of lifting heavy. This is going to be out throughout the whole block, but as you can see, the percentages are very, very similar, if not the same. But this is where we can again start to change the 1 rep max at which we're working off. Sometimes you might just rewind strength block and do it again if you want the lifter, if you see the lifter's either done pretty well with that block, why not keep them on the same block again and just up the 1 rep max. So like I say, those percentages remain the same, but the weight they're working off is different. But it's all about, again, the skill of lifting heavy, taking your time, being okay and not getting anxious and overwhelmed with feeling heavier weight on your back and not breaking down and seeing old habits now creep back in. In this block 4, this is what I'm looking at. I'm going, am I starting to see old habits and old flaws and weaknesses creep back into their lifting? If not, fucking excellent. We might find 1 or 2 new things that we're like, okay, there's a weakness there that's now sprung up. Let's start to refine that again. Let's refine these movement patterns and under heavier loads, not for volume, under heavier loads of, you can work between 3 to 6 reps here. Normal people will, start at around the 5, 4s. Some people might even go down to the 3s depending on the numbers that they're lifting. And then we skip over to block 5. Now, like I say with block 5, and again, I'm just going to pull up the strength numbers here. You can work from 77.5 up to 90%. So that is what we're going to be doing inside of this training block here. We're going to be working within the 77.5 up to the 90%. If the lifter can push it, again, that's down to myself when I'm programming for them. Do I think they can handle it at the 1 rep max that they're basing off or they're working off? And it's almost the same thing, it's the skill of lifting heavy loads. And it's going to be working even closer now to those, those 3 to 5 reps. We're going to really drop that volume back. We're going to keep pushing that intensity higher. The volume is going to drop slightly on their accessories as well, just for neural fatigue. Again, intermediates won't need too much of that because they're still new to all of this, so you don't have to drop it back as much as you would with an advanced lifter. But still, it's going to creep back just a little bit so that they can recover between training session to training session. And again, this is another training block where, as a coach, it's very much just, and what people really need to understand about how coaches need to adapt through training blocks is, it's picking up those 1 or 2%. When you get to these numbers here in these percentages, you don't want to be changing a whole fucking heap. If you see that, there's a weakness in someone's lifting, but they have a competition coming up, you don't just want to then just try to tear up the book and change things now because the weights are too heavy. Sometimes you need to just be like, okay, I'm seeing this, it's probably going to be there for the rest of this training block leading into their peaking block and into their competition. But mental note, we'll refine it later once we go back to block 1 and we'll work on those technical aspects there. But inside of this block, again, it's just focused on how well can you maintain and avoid breakdown in movement, i.e. think about knees caving in, your back rounding, your shoulders collapsing in your bench press, for example. How well can you avoid that and start to move the bar with efficiency and very limited breakdown? Then we go over to block 6. Now again, I go back to what Montana said, right? She's like, how often should I test my 1 rep max? Well, if the lifter at the end of this, peaking blocks usually last around, 4 weeks. You can either do a peaking block here and work them up to 90, maybe 92.5, 95% if they have a competition coming up, or you're going to peak their strength. You're working in the reps here of 1 to 3, so that, at this stage here, the lifter's purely focusing on lifting maximally. It's kind of very, very similar to the strength blocks, but now it's at those maximal numbers, very close to the 1 rep max, if not over their 1 rep max, and you're just refining how well you can lift for that single rep, because in powerlifting, that's what matters, that single rep. So what you can do here is you can continue with the peak and you can push them up to that, 90 to 95%, deload, comp week, or you can rewind this whole training block if the lifter doesn't need to test. If they have no, they don't really want to test their 1 rep max, maybe inside of their strength block they hit a new like rep PB, like at their max or above their 1 rep max, and it's like fucking excellent. We don't really need to go for that single because we're really starting to break down. So let's rewind this whole training cycle and start back at block 1 again. Or like I say, I think Montana's competition's in September, so what we're in March at the moment. She's in block 2 going into block 3. You know, we're probably going to have to rewind some of these cycles as we lead into this competition, so we peak her for that competition there, and there's plenty of time to do that. So I'm just going to pull up this slide again, beginners and intermediates. If you're a beginner to intermediate inside of powerlifting, right, or you're one of my lifters and you just started with me, and you know, I am defining you as a beginner or intermediate towards all of this, you need more time building muscle, spend more time building muscle, because you can have the luxury of that before you get too strong and you can't. Again, you'll find out why that is in another video. You will need to spend more time learning the movements, understanding the principles of squatting, bench and deadlifting, like understanding them, applying them, and then becoming consistent at them. And then here are the percentages that you work within as a rough guide for your hypertrophy, strength and peaking. Now always remember, never change your percentages as just a rule of thumb. Change the 1 rep max that you're working with. And again, you can do 5 to 10 kilos or 5 to 10% and adjust accordingly from there. But this is, again, this is really gonna help Montana, because it will give her a better understanding of how we're gonna lay out her training program. And how much better is it when it's structured in front of you like this? You go, okay, cool. You know, above there, it might be January is gonna be block 1, February, roughly block 2, block 3, block 4, block 5. Okay, cool, like fucking, you know, 5 or 6 months down the line, then I'm gonna test my 1 rep max. I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I might have a better body composition. And then what you can do is, when you then rinse and repeat this same training cycle, you're gonna notice that the old numbers at 62.5% are no longer the same, right? Chances are, like, you can be working at much higher numbers at 62.5% because your 1 rep max changed. You don't need to continue to work at these high percentages all the fucking time, like kind of sitting in block 4 to block 5. It won't work for you. You will fuck things up. You need time to build more muscle and refine technique so that you can make sure that those imbalances and weaknesses do not creep back up on you a little bit later. So that is a beginner and intermediate training cycle. If you have any questions, or there's a video that you want me to do, then again, comment below, or you can message me privately on Instagram at blackdanbarbell, or JF_Delaney, that's my personal one. I'm also on Facebook as well. Again, subscribe, please like, and press that little bell thing. Apparently that notifies you every time I post a video. They're still coming out Friday, guys. You know, I'm really looking for those subscribers and likes on this, purely so that I can get up in that algorithm, give a guy a hand. I think this has been a really good video, and I will speak to you guys next Friday.